Hello, my name is J.R. Pimentel, and I'm a board member for Heidrea for Heroes, and I'm excited to be here with you today to speak a little bit about resume writing tips for veterans. I came across an article the other day when I was doing research to develop this presentation that appeared in Forbes magazine in 2015, and it got me thinking about the amount of time that I spend as a human resources professional really taking a look at resumes and cover letters. I always thought that I was kind of quick, spending about 20 to 30 seconds reviewing resumes, but the headline in Forbes magazine said that you have 6 seconds to grab the recruiter's attention, and here's how. And then the article went on to talk about some resume writing tips and techniques that we're going to share with you here today. For the amount of time that you spend putting together a well-written resume and cover letter, it may sound daunting that a recruiter is only looking at it for 6 seconds, but it's all the more reason why we have to pay close attention to the details in both the cover letter and the resume. So what I'm going to spend our time here today on this webinar talking about are just a few things. First, really talking about why a resume is so important in your job search, and the same can be said for the cover letter as well. Then I'm going to review 8 tips for veterans in writing your resume, and some things that you should do differently than most civilians are doing with their resumes as well. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about 2 different types of resumes, and then I'll spend some time talking about some other resources that you can use if you're having a difficult time putting some of that stuff together. So the purpose of a resume really is threefold. The first is knowing that you only have 6 seconds for the person who's reviewing your resume and cover letter to make a good first impression. It really is to pique the interest of the person who's reading your resume so that they want to know more about you and want to call you in for a job interview or for a phone screen. The second is to really highlight some of your specific accomplishments. And when we get into talking about writing your resume, we'll see that one of the common mistakes that people make is that their resumes read more like a task list rather than a listing of some of the specific accomplishments that they've been able to experience in their work and their military career. And then finally, a resume is a great tool for you to use if you're given that job interview to guide the discussion about your previous work experience and your previous military experience as well. So I came across this article that had 8 resume tips specifically for veterans. And the first tip that the author says is to really have a clearly defined objective. And we'll take a look at some samples in just a little bit about what a well-written objective looks like. There's 2 schools of thought, though, with the objectives. Although this author feels that it's a must, my advice is that you have to make sure that your objective isn't so specific that it limits the type of job that you could get. So it should be clear, a clear statement about what you're looking for in a career, what you hope to accomplish in the position that you're looking to get, but it shouldn't be so specific that it limits you to only 1 or 2 particular jobs. Point number 2 in this article was, don't forget that we're civilians. And by that, there are a lot of things, a lot of terminology that you use, a lot of jargon, a lot of acronyms that we really have no understanding what that means. So when you're writing your resume, really have someone who doesn't have a military background review your resume, review your accomplishments to make sure that they can understand that which you're trying to communicate in the resume. So try to make sure that your resume is free of any jargon, any acronyms, or any military specific terminology that we may not be aware of. The third is, don't be afraid to show off your military background. There are a lot of skills that you develop while serving our country that make you a great candidate for most organizations. Most people with military backgrounds have a great sense of understanding of what it means to collaborate with others, what it means to work as part of a team, what it means to have a specific vision or mission and work towards those missions. And your job is to be able to put that experience, those experiences onto your resume in a way that the hiring manager realizes that those are transferable skills that will benefit us if we hire you. So the fourth tip is seek out jobs that match specific skill sets. And in just a a little bit, we'll talk about some resources that are available to veterans that can take a look at positions that were held in the military, some specific skills that you learned while in that position, and some jobs and industries that can use those skills in the civilian workforce. Number 5 says to highlight your educational background. And a mistake that some people make when they're writing their resume is they think that only college education matters. But you may be applying for a lot of jobs that require skills that you may have acquired in a vocational high school or a technical high school or even a regular high school. And you really should highlight the skills that you've learned, no matter what level of education, and match that to the skills that the employer is looking for. And that's something that goes across all 8 of these tips, is that when you're applying for a job, years ago we used to write one resume and then we'd make 100 copies and send that same resume out to all of the different places that we were applying for positions at. And today I'll tell you that every time you're applying for a job, you should be looking at the specific skills and education that that particular job is looking for and tailor your resume for each position that you're applying for. So instead of having one resume that you send out to 20 different employers, you may have one resume that's your template, and you may have 20 different variations depending on the job that you're applying for. So number 6 says, don't forget the basics. Now that you know that the headline said that a recruiter only spends about 6 seconds looking at your resume and cover letter, you have to make sure that the information that's on the resume, and most importantly, the basic information, is all accurate, and that, for example, your name, address, and your contact information. Hiring managers, human resources professionals aren't going to try to call you 5 or 6 different times. So if you have an incorrect telephone number or if you have an email that bounces back, your chances of getting called in for that interview quickly diminish, because we're not going to chase after you. So when we talk about don't forget the basics, make sure that all of the contact information, that you've reviewed it, and that that contact information really is in fact a way that we can get in touch with you. Tip number 7 is probably the most important tip of all of these, and that is to proudly display your accomplishments. Knowing, again, that you only have 6 seconds to catch a recruiter's eye, they really aren't interested in what you think you might be able to do in a job. What we're looking for is what you have already done, either in a job or in your military career as well. So more importantly than just descriptions of tasks and functions that you've had, we're looking for things that you've gone above and beyond with, and specific accomplishments that you've had. In many cases, some of the accomplishments don't have to be specific to you as an individual. They can be team accomplishments as well, but accomplishments absolutely are a way that will distinguish you from other candidates, in the sense of knowing that you have a proven track record of success in your previous endeavors. Tip number 8 says, double and triple check your resume's mechanics. And this one is of critical importance as well. Nothing will get you into the pile of candidates that we're not interested in quicker than typographical errors, or a poorly formatted resume, or a resume that contains other mechanical mistakes or grammatical mistakes. The thought process with that is, if you're applying for a job, we want to see that you as a candidate are taking the time to really make sure that your resume and cover letter are crafted in a way that shows that you have an attention to detail, that you're going to do your work well, because your resume and cover letter really are a reflection of what we think you're going to be able to do for us if we give you a job or if we bring you in for an interview as well. So these are 8 resume tips for vets. Again, very quickly, have a clearly defined objective. Don't forget that we're civilians. Avoid the jargon. Show off your military background. Seek jobs that match your specific skills. Emphasize your educational background. Don't forget the basics. Proudly display your accomplishments. And then last but not least, double check, triple check, and have someone else double check your resume as well. So there are some things that are common to most resumes. And the first I've already mentioned is your contact information. In this day and age, a lot of recruiters are using social media in addition to your name, your address, your telephone number, and an email address. So some people are recommending that if you have a LinkedIn profile, that you put that on your resume as well. But I would urge you not to put too much information about your social media on your resume. I'm a firm believer that a heading that has your name, your address, a telephone number, the best number for us to call you, and an email address is best. There's also, we mentioned earlier, having a clearly stated objective, having a career summary or a job objective that tells the person who's doing the hiring what you're looking for in your career path, what you're looking for in applying for the job with us. There's an example on the screen of a clearly written objective, and there are a lot of resources available to you on the web that will help you craft a well-written objective statement as well. But again, I go back to that advice that when you are writing your objective, that you make sure that it's broad enough that tells the employer what it is that you're looking for and not so narrow that it locks you into just one or two positions. So the next few bullets, depending on what type of resume you set up, the order may be slightly different, but one of the things that we're looking for is your work experience. And when we talk about work experience, that could be your time in the military, that can be in other jobs as well. But when you're writing a resume, at least in the first example that I'm going to give, you always start with your most recent position first and then work your way backwards. Education and training, particularly training courses, even that you've had within the military that have taught you some specific skills and given you some knowledge that sets you apart from other candidates. If those skills exist and you have some specialized training that are relevant to the job that you're applying for, and that's the key, those should appear on your resume as well. So skill statements, in most resumes you'll see a listing of skills that really talk about what you bring to the table, why it's in the employer's best interest to hire you. The reality is, while it would be a nice thought to think that when you're applying for a job and you have a resume, that many people will read it and say, oh, well, this is going to be a great next step for this person. The reality is that most businesses that are hiring for employees are looking to answer the question, how will this candidate help me? So a listing of your skills, a listing of any certifications that you have that are specific to the job, all are things that help to set you apart from other candidates as well. You know, when we're talking about skills and we're talking about certifications and training and work experience, what I advise is that you put all of your sellable items first. Whatever it is, whether it's education, work experience, skills, certification, and training, whatever it is that will set you apart from every other candidate, that's the stuff that should appear early on in your resume. So if it's your work history or your military experience and you have uninterrupted service there, then I'm going to recommend a chronological resume, that you put your work experience first. However, if you've had a work experience that maybe had some interruptions, or that you were away from a job or from military service and you can't explain that time in between, then I'm going to recommend that you list your skills and your certifications first, and we'll take a look at what each of these look like. So the first one is a chronological resume. Two most common types are a chronological resume and a functional resume, and then there's kind of a hybrid between both. But the chronological is probably the most common type of resume that we see. And here you can see that it lists the events beginning with the most recent first, and it highlights continuous employment and, above all, accomplishments. So whether it's a chronological resume or a functional resume, your accomplishments will be what set you apart from other candidates as well. In this screen, we can see that the components of a chronological resume are the header that we already spoke about, that has all of your up-to-date information so that when the recruiter goes to call you, that they can get in touch with you. Your professional summary or your objective, followed by some specific skills that you have that match the skills in the job posting that you're applying for. So every time you look at a job posting, you should ask yourself the question, what skills does it look like this employer is looking for, and how many of those skills that I have that I can highlight on my resume? Below that, we have the work experience that has a brief summary about what your position was, how long you were there in that position, and then again, most importantly, a list of accomplishments that you experienced, that you had while you were working in that particular job. So this is a summary that I found online. If you were to do a search online for chronological resumes or chronological resumes for veterans, you'll see that there are a ton of resources available to you to help you with that. The other type of resume is a functional resume. So maybe you had some time that you can't explain where you weren't working, or some time in between your military service and when you re-entered the workforce. With a functional resume, what you're doing is you're putting the skills up front and then your work experience behind that, so that you're really highlighting the skills that you have acquired in your background. So similar to the chronological resume, we still have the header, and we still have the professional summary or the objectives. We have a listing of skills right below, but then what we have is a listing of particular skills and the way that we acquired those skills, or some accomplishments below those skills. And then following that, following the skills and your accomplishments, that's where you would list your work history with less detail than what you've done with your skills. So those are the two most common. I told you in the tips to avoid using jargon, to avoid using acronyms, to look for skills that you can highlight, and to match the skills that you have with the skills that the employer is looking to hire for. Here are 3 resources that are available to you that I found in my research, and I would imagine that you can find several others. But with these 3 resources in particular, you can enter the branch of military service that you were in, the position that you held within the military, and what it'll provide for you is a listing of all of the skills that you would have had in order to have been successful in that position in the military. Then what I love that it does, it takes it a step further, is that then it matches those skills to skills in the civilian workforce. So almost a side-by-side comparison. If you had this position in the military, you had to have these skills, and that translates into these skills that our employers are looking for today. So I'd encourage you to look at least these 3 resources, and just to go into the system and play around in the system for a little bit, to put in your previous military experience, so that then you can get not only a listing of the skills that you should have had to be successful while you were in the military, but then also, and more importantly, how those skills translate into the civilian workforce as well. For this slide, I have a great big listing, and I apologize that there are so many words on a small slide, but this is my do this and not that. And it really is kind of a summary of some of the things that I've spoken about already. The first is, do tailor your resume to each job and make it relevant. So the idea of having one resume that you send to everyone, if you still think that's a viable option, you can't do that. Look and study each job posting carefully, look at the specific skills that they're looking for, and then make tweaks to your resume template to send out an updated resume to the employer. Create a professional appearance. Go back to that quote that you have 6 seconds for whoever it is that's looking at that resume to make a great first impression. So make sure that the layout is good, make sure that it's free of any errors, make sure that it's something that's worth looking at, but don't overdo it. Nothing will put you into the rejected pile quicker than doing something that you think is going to catch the eye of a recruiter, like putting it on fancy colored paper or spraying it with a scent. Those things typically make a recruiter think that the content of the resume isn't what's important on that resume and will get you into the rejected pile sooner. The third tip is understand the attention span. And I know I've said it probably 4 or 5 times already. You really only have about it says here to 15 seconds. I'll say I spend about 20 seconds, but 6 to 20 seconds for both your resume and your cover letter to capture the interest of the person who's reading it. So within that time frame, make sure that you're able to communicate your accomplishments and your work experience in as few words as possible. Most recruiters don't want to read a lot of narrative. They don't want to read a story. They want to look at bullets of what you were supposed to do and how you went above and beyond to get that done. Make it interesting to read, and the best way for you to make that interesting is for you to focus on your accomplishments and what sets you apart. Ask yourself this question: what sets me apart from every other applicant? Even without knowing who they are, your job is to sell your skills and accomplishments in a way that the hiring manager wants to bring you in for an interview. Address all the requirements in a job description. If they are looking for a specific educational level, specific educational background or work experience, make sure that somewhere in your resume that those items are found. Otherwise, within those 6 to 20 seconds, the recruiter may say, well, this candidate otherwise looks like a good candidate, but they don't meet the minimum requirements. I'm going to put them in my no or in my maybe pile. Highlight accomplishments, not functions. We've spoken about that already a few times. Use action words to talk about things that you have done and demonstrate how you solved problems. The bottom line is most businesses are looking for someone who is going to help them to be able to succeed and to be able to meet their business goals. Your job is to be able to articulate that in the resume. And when possible, quantify results. Rather than saying, if you have budget experience, for example, saying something like, I managed a large budget and a team of 12, quantify by saying, I managed a $400,000 budget and a team of 12 engineers so that we know what exactly it is that you're talking about. Include volunteer experience if that volunteer experience is relevant to the position that you are applying for. Most organizations today have a great sense of civic pride when we get involved in the communities that we do business in, and we want like-minded individuals who are looking to serve the communities as well. So if you have volunteer experience that relates to the position that you're applying for, be sure to include that as well. It says do put your education at the bottom of the page. So that would be listed after either your work experience followed by skills if you're doing a chronological resume, or after your skills and work experience if you're doing a functional resume. And then I can't say it enough. Make sure you proofread the resume for errors. It really is the quickest way for your resume to end up in the rejected pile is if there are a lot of mistakes. And my advice to you is reach out to someone that you trust to proofread your resume for you, and again, to make sure that it's free of jargon. The line that a lot of people put on their resume that's really totally unnecessary is leave off the line that says references furnished upon request or references available on request. Most of us are going to be checking your references anyway, but we aren't going to be asking you for that until after you've been given an interview. The ideal resume really is 1 page for every 10 years of experience that you have. Most of us are looking for a 1-page resume or a 2-page resume tops. So you have very little space to communicate a lot of what we've already mentioned. Don't use your space with something that's not needed, like the references furnished upon request. The list of don'ts is just as long as the lists of do's. The first one I've already spoken about a few times. Don't use that generic resume. Fight the urge just to have 30 copies printed. See if you can have one template that you use that has all of the basic information. Study the job that you're applying for, and then tailor every single resume that you send out for the job that you're applying for. If you know that your resume is poorly worded, the worst thing that you can do is say, well, I need to get this in quickly. I'm going to send it in anyway. Take the time to really make sure that it's well written, that the layout is good, that the appearance is good, and that the content is excellent. Don't use a resume that takes too long to scan. So this is, I'll say it again, in only 6 seconds or up to 20 seconds, if it's taking too long to get a lot of the key information out, you're doing yourself a disservice by keeping that as your resume. Don't include personal interests. It seems like a few candidates make this mistake, and they'll talk about what some of their hobbies are or some of the things that they enjoy in their free time. Unless your interests are directly related to the skills and knowledge that the company is hiring for, my advice to you is to leave that off your resume completely. Don't create an untargeted work history. Make sure that everything that's on your resume really is applicable to the job that you're applying for. And never focus on what you were supposed to do. That's another kiss of death. Really talk about what you did, and again, I'll say it, what you were able to accomplish while you were doing what you were supposed to do. Don't use the words responsibility or duties. Just list some of the duties that you had without using those words in your summary, and then focus on your accomplishments below that. Avoid broad language. Avoid speaking about things in general terms about what you were supposed to do. If you're looking to catch the recruiter's eye, you really need to be specific about skills, experience, education, work history, etc. Don't include irrelevant volunteer information. We've already spoken about that. And then lastly, don't send out your resume without a second opinion. Find a trusted friend, find someone in industry or in the private sector, and show them not only the job posting that you have, but also the resume that you've created and the cover letter that you've created, and have them see if they can make a connection between all 3 of those documents. So, I based this today on the 8 tips and showed you a chronological and a functional resume. One more time, have a clearly defined objective, make sure that it's broad enough that it tells a little bit about what you're looking for, what you're able to offer the company, what you'll be able to do for them without being too narrow that it excludes you from other opportunities within a company. Don't forget that we're civilians. Make sure that if you're having a second set of eyes, review the resume, that it's free of jargon and acronyms. Show off your military background. We're so proud of you and the service that you've given to us and to our country, and to some of the knowledge and skills that you were able to obtain while you were serving our country, that's not something you should leave off of the resume. Tell us what skills you have acquired while you were serving us in our great country. Seek out jobs that match your specific skill sets. Again, making sure that there is a combination between your cover letter, your resume, and the job posting, and that you can see the link between the 3 of those. Emphasize your educational background, and remember that education isn't just college education, it's whatever knowledge and skills you were able to acquire at any level and how that relates to the position that you're applying for. Don't forget the basics. Make sure that your phone number is one that we can reach you at, and that your email address is professional and one that we can reach you at as well. Proudly display your accomplishments, because that's what's going to set you apart from other candidates. And then, I can't overstate this enough, double check and triple check your resume's mechanics to make sure that the layout is good, that it's free of any grammatical errors and other errors within the resume. I want to thank you for your time today, and I hope that you found something of value that will help you to craft a well-written cover letter and a well-written resume, and I want to thank you for your service to our great country.